At 15, long before Hollywood crowned him a golden icon, Robert Redford balanced on the roof of a girls' convent school, handcuffed, furious, and terrified, wondering if this was the moment his life would end before it even began. What no one knew is how close he truly came to losing everything. Before Hollywood ever called his name, before Sundance, before Newman, before the mythos, there was a kid dangling off a 50-foot theater tower in the middle of the night, a kid who dove naked into strangers' pools, a kid who ran from police lights, slept in shipping crates, and almost drifted so far off course that the world would never have known who he could become. This is not the story people usually tell about Robert Redford. But this is the story that shaped him. Robert Redford entered the world on August 18, 1936, born in Santa Monica but destined to grow up not by the ocean, but in the dusty heat of Van Nuys, a suburb still defining itself, where orange groves collided with new roads and wide, sun-baked neighborhoods were slowly filling with post-war families dreaming of normalcy. The Redfords were a working-class household, nothing flashy, nothing glamorous. His father, Charles, worked as an accountant for Standard Oil, a job demanding precision, punctuality, and quiet obedience. He was stern, deeply serious, a man who believed that hard work wasn't merely a virtue but the only way to survive the world. He expected discipline, stability, and gratitude. His mother, Martha, was the opposite. She had a softness about her, a warmth that didn't need words, a gentleness reflected in the way she touched his shoulder or smiled at his small victories. She encouraged curiosity, creativity, and rebellion of the healthy kind. She was, as Redford would say many years later, the emotional center of the house. Redford grew up between these two worlds, the world of strict lines and the world of open skies, and something inside him pulled toward the latter. Even in grade school, he wasn't the boy who sat quietly. He was the one racing ahead, the one looking out the window, the one whose mind ran faster than the lesson plan. Teachers called it restlessness, neighbors called it trouble. Robert simply felt something bigger pulling at him, a sense that the world stretched far beyond Van Nuys, beyond the expectations placed on him, beyond anything that could be contained. He wanted movement, discovery, edges. And sometimes edges come with danger. By the time Redford hit adolescence in the late 1940s and early 50s, America had entered a moment of cultural contradiction. The country told teenagers to sit still, follow rules, and fit neatly into suburbia, even as a new teen identity was forming: rock and roll, leather jackets, rebellion, freedom. Redford wasn't immune. In the cracked sidewalks and small shops of the San Fernando Valley, he found a friend who mirrored his energy, William Coomer, a boy with the same hunger for excitement and the same instinct for mischief. Together, they formed their own little street group. They called themselves the Barons. Not a gang in any dangerous sense, more a cluster of restless kids testing the limits of the world around them. They wore ducktails and denim, listened to the birth of rock music, and roamed the valley like it belonged to them. Coomer would later say Redford was the spark plug. The one with ideas. The one who took things 1 inch further. The one everyone followed even when they weren't quite sure why. And while their mischief wasn't violent, it had a daring edge, the kind that could tilt suddenly into real consequences. One of the boys' favorite rituals became almost mythic among their friends. Late at night, when their parents slept and the valley grew quiet, they would sneak to the rooftop of a neighborhood theater. A narrow ladder rose 50 feet up to the glowing tower where massive bulbs lit the sky. Climbing it was terrifying. Climbing it was exhilarating. And climbing it felt like freedom. At the top, Redford and his friends would twist out the glowing bulbs, hold them over the empty sidewalk below, and drop them. They shattered on impact like miniature stars exploding on the pavement. To them, it wasn't vandalism. It was a small act of rebellion against a world that constantly told them to behave. But the thrill was addictive. And soon, Redford looked for bigger horizons. The San Fernando Valley felt small to him, predictable. He wanted something more, a taste of a world he had never known, and in the darkened hills of Bel Air, he found it. Redford and his friends discovered that many wealthy families left their mansions empty during the winter. These vast, silent homes with marble floors, enormous chandeliers, and hallways that seemed to stretch forever became irresistible. They would slip in through unlocked doors or unlatched windows and wander, not to steal, not to vandalize, just to look, to imagine, to feel what it was like to stand inside the life of someone who had everything. William Coomer remembered one night in particular. Redford, completely caught up in the moment, stripped down and dove naked into a stranger's pool. The moonlight hit the water like silver. It was ridiculous, daring, reckless. And absolutely unforgettable. Redford wasn't looking for treasure. He wasn't looking for crime. He was looking for contrast, the world that wasn't his. He would later say that these nights weren't about wanting wealth, they were about wanting possibility. But teenage mischief has a way of escalating. Small adventures become habits. Habits become risks. Soon the barons took their dented jalopy, barely running, and drifted from gas station to gas station. Back then, after attendants closed for the night, the pump hoses often held tiny leftovers of gasoline, not much, half a gallon, maybe less, but to the boys it was enough to keep cruising. It became a routine, station to station, siphoning drops of fuel, laughing like they were invincible. When that stopped being enough, they moved on to hubcaps. $20 a set. Quick cash. Instant thrill. And for a moment, they felt like kings. But the kingdom was built on sand. From the outside, these were just pranks, normal teenage rebellion, but inside the Redford home, Charles watched his son's choices with increasing dread. He feared the world would eat his son alive. He feared Robert's recklessness would destroy him. He feared a future slipping away. So he tried his own kind of intervention. He found Robert a job at a shipping yard in El Segundo, the sort of job Charles believed could straighten out a young man: hard labor, early mornings, real consequences. But the work didn't inspire Redford, it deadened him. He would crawl into packing crates, exhausted and bored, and fall asleep until he was caught. When the yard manager fired him, he delivered a line that branded itself into Redford's memory. "Son, you'll never make it anywhere." Words like that either break a person or ignite them. Redford wasn't ready for ignition yet. The final turning point came during what was supposed to be another typical stunt: climbing the roof of Mount St. Mary's convent school for girls. Only this time, it wasn't empty streets and stolen moments. It was sirens, police lights, shouts cutting through the night. Redford and Coomer scrambled across the tiles, trying to escape, but this time there was no clean getaway. Officers stopped them, arrested them, and brought them face to face with consequences bigger than any they'd seen before. Redford wasn't being scolded by his father anymore. He was facing the law. And he felt something break, or perhaps awaken. It was a moment that forced him, his family, and everyone around him to face the truth. He was drifting toward nothing. And something had to change. Real change rarely comes from punishment. Real change often comes from pain. Shortly after his arrest, Redford suffered the loss that would define him: the death of his mother, Martha. Her passing cracked something inside him. It left him drifting, hollow, without the person who had always understood him. Grief didn't push him back toward rebellion, it left him searching for meaning. He ended up at the University of Colorado, but he wasn't ready for structure. He drank too much, partied too hard, floated through classes. Eventually, he was expelled. And suddenly, the world felt both enormous and empty. So he ran, not to escape the world, but to find himself in it. Redford fled to Europe, wandering through Paris, Florence, and small quiet towns where life moved at a different tempo. The cities were old, their walls were covered in history, their nights were filled with conversation, philosophy, art. There he discovered painting not as a hobby but as a pulse, a force, a place where he could pour all the restless energy, all the grief, all the turbulence that had once fueled mischief. In Europe, he wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't a disappointment. He wasn't a kid on the edge of trouble. He was an artist. And for the first time, he felt purpose. When he returned to the United States, he carried something new inside him, discipline not forced by his father, but chosen by himself. He enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And something clicked. Acting demanded everything he had always been: the emotional depth his mother nurtured, the discipline his father preached, the adventurous spirit of his youth, the curiosity of an artist. And Hollywood noticed. By the mid-1960s, Robert Redford was no longer the restless boy from Van Nuys. He was tall, striking, quietly intense, the sort of actor who didn't just appear on screen but arrived there. He earned roles in stage productions, then in films. Barefoot in the Park, charming, witty, charismatic. Jeremiah Johnson, rugged, introspective, haunted. The Candidate, sharp, political, eerily prophetic. And then came the film that changed everything. Starring opposite Paul Newman, Redford ascended from rising actor to cinematic phenomenon. The chemistry between the two was effortless, witty, warm, electric. Audiences felt like they weren't just watching characters but a real friendship. That friendship became legendary. Newman, older and already iconic, became a mentor of sorts, not in a rigid formal sense, but in the way he carried himself. He taught Redford how to move through fame with grace, how to make choices that mattered, how to stay human in an industry that devoured people. Redford often said that Newman helped him understand not just acting, but life. And together, the two became something rare in Hollywood. A duo defined not by scandal, rivalry, or ego, but by trust. Looking back, it's almost impossible to connect the reckless teenager standing on a theater tower with the man who became an Academy Award-winning actor, a director of remarkable sensitivity, the founder of Sundance, an activist, a storyteller, a cultural icon. But the bridge between those worlds is built from everything he lived: the rebellion, the heartbreak, the wandering, the art, the discovery. His mischief gave him edge. His grief gave him depth. Europe gave him vision. Newman gave him wisdom. Hollywood gave him the stage. But it was Redford who gave himself purpose. For decades, Robert Redford cultivated an image of quiet integrity, environmental advocate, independent filmmaker, Sundance founder, the thoughtful rebel with a cause. But underneath that carefully guarded elegance lay the truth he rarely spoke of, the truth that resurfaced only in scattered interviews and whispered recollections from his stepbrother William. The Hollywood golden boy had once stood on the edge of throwing his future away. He was not born polished, not born a leader, not destined for greatness. He was a kid who climbed towers to smash light bulbs. A kid who siphoned gasoline by the half-gallon. Who broke into mansions not to steal, but simply to dream. A kid handcuffed on the roof of a convent school at 16, facing the possibility that his life story would end right there. To Redford, the revelation was painful, not because he was ashamed of who he had been, but because he knew how fragile the path to redemption truly was. His later career, the awards, the activism, the founding of the Sundance Institute wasn't built on a flawless life. It was built on transformation. When Robert Redford passed away at 89, Hollywood mourned not just an actor but an architect of American storytelling. His films shaped generations. His festival gave voice to countless independent artists. His activism inspired movements worldwide. But perhaps his greatest legacy lies in the contrast between who he was and who he became. He proved that a troubled teen can grow into a man of influence. That a kid who once slept inside shipping crates could one day hold an Academy Award. That mistakes do not define a life, choices do. And through all the decades, William Coomer, the childhood friend who knew the wild boy behind the icon, never forgot. Bob was always searching, he said once, searching for something bigger, something meaningful, and in the end he found it. Today, as Hollywood reflects on his life, we remember not only the golden-haired screen legend, but the restless kid from Van Nuys who refused to be trapped by anyone's expectations, not even his own. Robert Redford's story is not just one of fame. It is one of redemption, transformation, and the fragile, extraordinary journey of a boy who grew into a giant.